Hello, and welcome to Your Creative and Magical Life, which is hopefully your real life, but is also this podcast, a show that explores the intersections of tarot, creativity, magic, anti capitalism, nature worship, social justice, and all sorts of metaphysical and real life stuff, all with the goal of helping you cultivate a life that sparkles with magic and creativity. I'm your host, Cecily Saylor. Let's make some magic. Hello, creative spirits. Welcome to episode 8. In this episode, we're exploring card number 5 in the major arcana, which is the Hierophant. This is a little bit of an obscure card, partly just because the word Hierophant is not in use in modern times. No one's walking around saying Hierophant. I didn't know this word until I started working with tarot. And the definition in the dictionary of Hierophant is a person, especially a priest in ancient Greece, who interprets sacred mysteries or esoteric principles. The word comes from ancient Greece. There's the root hieros, meaning sacred. And then there's the term phanon, which refers to show or reveal. So this revealing or showing of the sacred. And you'll see in this card, especially in traditional representations, there's a male figure in red robes standing up on what appears to be a stage of some kind. And there are two what appear to be parishioner type people, and you only see the backs of their heads because they're looking at the Hierophant. And the Hierophant is up there delivering information, revealing the sacred to the parishioners. So, in a very traditional sense, this is the function of inside religion, where someone stands up there and tells them, the masses, what the texts mean, what the gods say, what they want of humans, all of that. So a kind of interpreter or translator, which of course is a little tricky because we know how people in such positions have abused that status of being the one who shows or reveals the sacred. But when we open that up and bring it into modern times, I really think of this card as being about the messenger, maybe the teacher, someone who's channeling information and disseminating it so more people can understand. My guest for the show is Becky Bullard, who runs a project called Democrasexy. And Becky lives here in Austin. Even my first meeting with Becky was magical, and I'll tell you why. I was giving a talk in person for Creative Mornings, which is a global organization that I recommend you check out if you're a creative spirit. They offer free virtual field trips, lots of them on all kinds of different topics. They have local chapters that meet in person to deliver these kinds of talks that I was giving on that particular day. It's all volunteer run. It's all free for everyone who interacts with it. It's a great thing, Creative Mornings. So I was giving this talk, and my talk was about Kismet. And as it happened, I had been in conversation over email with Becky. I can't remember how we got connected, but she wanted to meet up. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And we had scheduled a coffee that happened to be shortly after the talk I was going to give. So I went to the place and I gave the talk, and Becky was actually in the audience. And so, and she didn't know I was speaking. She didn't know she knew who I was because we were trying to get together, right? But she didn't go there like knowing it was me talking. Then we were like, oh, hey, we're supposed to have coffee after I had this talk. We're supposed to have coffee in like 20 minutes. Why don't I drive you over to Book People and we'll have our coffee? So the universe brought us together a little bit in advance. Also, hear why she's the perfect person for this. She is out there spreading messages to help people engage in the democratic process such that it still exists, helping people engage in civic mechanics, getting out there, being vocal, making change in community through civic processes. There's a lot of disillusionment around our political process now. Understandably, politics in America is frankly shit. And it's really easy to feel resigned and hopeless. And Becky's out there trying to make it sexy, make it fun, make it possible, make it easier, make it understandable. So she is the perfect person to be having this conversation with. I'm getting goosebumps just as I describe her. I'm really excited for you to hear this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hello, Becky. I am so excited you're coming on the show to talk about the Hierophant. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be speaking with you, and I feel like it's going to be hard not to talk to you for like 4 hours.
Yes, I will also have that struggle. So, the magic of our the magic of all of this became, you sent me an email last night before we got on this call to record this episode. And for me, thinking about like, who should I talk to about the Hierophant? There was actually someone else I thought of a while ago, and I was kind of trying to bring them on the show, and it didn't work out, or there was just never like a yes. And there was no great sadness, but I didn't take it personally. And then I'm like, who else? Who? And then it was like, yes, Becky. Becky was always the one.
Oh,
That whole thing didn't work out for obvious reasons to me now. So that decision became clear. And then you said yes, which was super exciting for me. And then last night, you sent me an email sharing some of the backstory in your journey coming to Democrasexy. That's like how I know you. You are out in the world as Democrasexy. We'll talk more about that. And then in your email, you told me a little bit about like some of the origins of that. And that was so magical. And because the Hierophant is about messaging and storytelling and communication, I think I just want to start with this story. And that probably wasn't a very great setup, but I'm just letting people know there's like a magic explosion coming. And it was so exciting for me when you told me about it. So, can we start there?
yeah. Yeah. So when you sent me your very kind email saying such nice things about my work and how you were associating me with the Hierophant and th thought of me as a messenger, I like burst into tears. I'm like already tearing up a little bit. Fair warning, I cry all the time about everything, so it'll probably happen a lot throughout this conversation. But so when you sent me that email and you talked about you see me as a messenger, it brought me back to the origin story of Democrasexy, actually. And back during quarantine lockdown, during the early days of the pandemic, is really when my new version of my spiritual journey and sort of like witchy journey began because we had all this time, right, for introspection and we really had nothing else to do other than be with
Be with ourselves.
ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also had this sense that, this truly shocking, terrible thing had happened in the world that I never could have imagined would happen in my lifetime, this global pandemic, unlike anything that any of us had ever experienced in our lifetime. But along with that, sort of like being gobsmacked by that, I was like, wait a minute. If unimaginable, terrible things are possible, perhaps unimaginable, good and magical things are also possible. And I became much more open to like the mystical, magical realms. So at some point during during the time when we were all in our homes looking for things to do, I found this art course from this amazing artist, Whitney Avra, who does these sort of like really cool collage artworks. And it was
This says awaken your highest self.
awakening your highest self.
Yeah. I pulled up your email because there's an image you sent
Yeah.
me too that we'll talk about. Go ahead.
And
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So it was like a several week process where she walked us through this, creating this artwork, and every layer of it was infused with some kind of mystical meaning. So it started out with a photo of ourselves. So I had this photo of myself, which was from a boudoir shoot that I did in celebration of my 40th birthday. Um, and that was kind of the genesis of Democrasexy, because what I was doing at the time with those photos was posting these sexy photos on Instagram paired with a caption about social justice, sex sells. So I was trying to get people's attention with my boobs and get them to pay attention to whatever I had to say that was meaningful. So I used one of those images in this mystical artwork, and I wrote in the background all around it, I'm capable of being a messenger. And this was before I had started Democrasexy or done any of this stuff that you know me for now. And
Yeah.
so this was such a full circle moment when you were like, I see you as a messenger. So I like put it into my mystical artwork that I could do that.
And then you manifested it and you became that. And then people with podcasts were like, I need a messenger. Who could it be? Oh, it's obviously Becky.
I'm just like, truly, it's the universe works in such magical ways.
And I love your logic there. If you turn on the news at night or however you got your news, just the fire hose of like despair, despairable, despicable, awful things that were happening that individually we didn't know what exactly to do about it. And instead of just despairing, it's like, well, if unimaginable, what you said, unimaginable, horrible things can happen, maybe the reverse is true too. And then I think that's the inner breakthrough. We need something like that, our own version of that, to start like going into those realms of magic, which then you fully did. And you sent me, I started crying when I got your email last night. I had full body chills when you told me this. And then you sent an image, you sent a photo of the artwork you made, and it looks honestly remarkably like there's a lot of similarities to the Hierophant.
Oh,
You're wearing a red jacket with these white
fringe.
pearl fringe. Thank you. I'm so bad at fashion vocabulary. And in the Hierophant, there's like uh, white adornments, I guess, with the red
Oh.
robe that the Hierophant's wearing. And you're facing forward. You're talking like you're holding a telephone, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. And there's like a little bit of boob showing, which is different from the tarot card. Um, but the background is yellow. There's this like red triangle behind your head. And there's like a teapot, this golden, beautiful teapot sort of pouring rainbow like into your crown. And then you're speaking on the phone. And I really think of the Hierophant that way, that it's a channeling kind of archetype that spirit or but life experience and things like that get dropped into our channel, and it's our job, if we're in kind of a hierophant place, to then project it out and share the message with other people. So it's just really astonishing that the image now like really foretells so much of what you ended up embodying. And then there's a black cat sitting on the piece of artwork in the photo. I was like, this is the witchiest shit that's happened
I
in
know.
2024. It's so
My
good.
little familiar got in there.
Perfect. I love it. Okay. Thank you for that story. Thank you for working your magic. And can you tell us a little more? We're just gonna kind of weave through like your story and the Hierophant and be learning about both of them all the time. And I don't know exactly how it'll all go, but can you talk a little bit about from that moment, like what evolved from there to the Democrasexy that we know and love today?
Yeah. So as I said, I started out, posting these images from this boudoir shoot and with a message that I felt was meaningful, and people were really resonating with it. And especially women, I think, were like so into the idea of somebody taking ownership of their body in this way, and like in the ways that female bodies get used for messaging, for attention, for all the things that they get used for, that I was taking ownership of mine to use it for what I wanted to use it for. And people were really resonating with that. And then also I got a comment from a guy who followed me who was like, "This makes me uncomfortable." And I was like, "Ooh, let's that means there's something there." you know? So I decided uh to make it a real thing. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this from just being my own personal little account and make kind of an organization out of this. And so that's where Democrasexy was born. Making democracy sexy so more people do it is my whole goal. So I had not been involved in politics or political organizing or social justice movements or anything like that until after the 2016 election happened. And after that happened and Trump was elected, I was really upset with myself that I hadn't done more to create the outcome that I wanted to see in the world. I was expecting other people who were more qualified than me, smarter than me, more capable to be doing the things out in the world. And then I was like, oh, maybe there's not enough people doing that. Maybe I should figure out how all of this works so that I can plug in the way that I could have the best impact. So I started learning as much as I could about how state and local politics work in Texas, because I figured that was where I could have the most impact. And it was also where I found it most difficult to get information as a beginner. Like, how do I start? How do these structures work? Where do I fit in? And so actually before Democrasexy, I had a different organization that I called a creative civic engagement organization with a couple other amazing women called Rouser. And we had a podcast called The Rabble, which was a Texas politics podcast. So I'm happy to be back on a mic here. um, but Democrasexy started out, my first big launch event was in October of 2021 when SB 8, the 6-week abortion ban in Texas, had just gone into effect. And all my friends were like, what do we do? There was so much despair and so much just like not knowing what the next steps were to take. And so I was like, I'm going to throw a party because to make democracy sexy, you have to throw parties. I consider myself to be a pleasure activist, which means that not only am I advocating for our pleasure, but also I know that in order to stay engaged in the work of change making, which will take longer than my lifetime, in order to not burn out, I need to make it as pleasurable as possible. So I threw this party called Texorcism. uh it's October, so it's like Halloween time. It's very witchy. So Texorcism, we're casting the demons out of the Texas Capitol. We're gonna cast spells. We're gonna cast votes. We all dressed up as witches. I had somebody do a tarot reading for Texas to look at what was in the cards for the state. And I had a drag performance, and then I had a panel of experts talking about how did we get here when it comes to abortion rights and where do we go next, including Wendy Davis and Diana Limon Mercado, who was the executive director of Planned Parenthood Texas Votes at the time, and Marcia Jones, who was the executive director of the AFIA Center up in Dallas. And so we had, learning, but also witchiness and fun and music and dancing. And that was kind of how it all started. And that's kind of the spirit that I've kept throughout it. And at the time, I was like, not entirely serious with the witchy elements, a little bit, but now I've gotten very serious about that part.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this is real. Let's stay on this wave. Yeah, the witchy piece makes so much sense, and it's so exciting to see it grow alongside and incorporated into your work. And it seems to be very simpatico with the overall like positioning around it, which started with this reclaiming of your body to say what you wanted to say. And of course, radicalism and witchery, I think, has been there a long time. And witches are all about, like their own autonomy and not living inside institutions and being told who to be by the state or whatever. So, yeah, victory to the goddess with all of that. I'm curious, what were you up to before you made this transition? Like, how did you spend your time or what were you working on?
Yeah. So I spent most of my career in advertising as a brand strategist and a copywriter. So I was learning how to take, like for a while, I worked at Dell Technologies and I was learning how to take complicated jargon about computers and translate it into something that people could emotionally connect to. And so then I was like, oh, I can take all these skills that I learned in the corporate world and translate that into, you know, taking political jargon and making it something relatable to the peeps.
How has it what are your impressions of how things have grown and where you are at the moment compared to where you started?
Oh man. So one of the things I was laughing about this past week is so I really get most of my engagement on Instagram. And recently, Meta has limited political content. And so I'm seeing this really funny sort of reversal happen where like when I first started out posting like my cleavage and like my booty and whatever, I was worried that I was going to be censored by Instagram for that. And now I see people doing kind of the opposite. All these political content creators are like posting sexy photos of themselves to get around the political like moratorium. So it's just been a funny to see that kind of come all the way around.
Yeah, you're ahead of the curve. What are having done it for almost, I guess, a full like presidential election cycle, how are you feeling about your own impact? Like, what do you notice about what's reflected back to you about your work or what you're putting out there?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how that has evolved, like what I feel compelled to put out. And what I'm always guided by, I always ask myself two questions when I'm deciding what to put out. The first is, what does loving my community look like today? Like, what do the people need? And then the second question I ask is, what would feel good for me? Because I'm a Libra, right? There's so much Libra in my chart. So we got to have that balance, right? Of like
Mhm.
giving to others, but also nourishing myself. So in the beginning, when I was starting out, it was like very factual information, like giving people lots of tools to understand what is happening in politics and how can they get involved. And what I find myself being called more toward now is like that was all addressing kind of the structural barriers for people to get involved. And now I'm realizing that there are tremendous emotional and psychological barriers for people to try and make change. And so that's where I'm feeling called to like put my energy for my own self. Like, how do I keep going? And then sharing what I'm learning and what's nourishing me with others so they can also keep going.
Yeah, beautiful. I love those two questions. Those do feel very Libra centered, like thinking about relationships with the community and then also the relationship with yourself, like what will serve you, what will serve them. And I think those are questions for anyone who's getting involved in activism. How can I serve the moment with the skills, talents, experience I have already? And then how can I do something that makes sense to me that I feel somewhat natural doing, you know? So those feel really beautiful and critical. And then one thing that comes up for me around the Hierophant is like I was very, very shy, like an only child, shy, quiet for a lot of it, like wanting to be a background person and not be very visible and feeling much more comfortable like communicating and writing than like speaking and having people look at me when I was talking. But, through like working at nonprofits and being like an event organizer and having to like train instructors for a while, or like teaching creative writing in the classroom, or getting up on stage at the library to like introduce big authors or something. I had to really work with a lot of fear, and one thing that helped me was this idea that it's not about me. Like, I'm a channel through which information will move. And like, what do they need to hear to get excited about a library, or to get excited about an event? Or what do I want them to know about what the library is doing right now, and why it might feel good to support the library at this moment? And so that took it out of like my ego somewhat. And I was like, I just have to deliver this information in a way that I think like I might want to hear it. I love what you said earlier too about so we can do democracy more, and this like notion that democracy isn't just like a philosophical framework or a way to describe a system. It's a action. It's like love. Like if we want a democracy, we're gonna have to like make it and do it and act it out. There's like a salad of things that I was ruminating on as I was listening to you, but coming to a question about your own voice. Two things. You were talking about like the psychological and emotional barriers, and maybe we'll start there. And I'm curious, like, what do you feel like those were for you before you before 2016, when you were like, and then when you were like, oh, maybe I could have done more, and maybe it's time for me to start doing more like ASAP. What were some of the things you think held you back before you made that switch?
I really believed that you had to be an expert to try and engage with the system. Like, I thought you had to have a political science degree if you wanted to have any impact on politics. But the more that I've been involved in the system, even just for example, last weekend I went to the Travis County Democratic Party convention. And I remember a few years ago, the first convention I ever went to, I was like, oh my gosh, the people making the decisions are just whoever shows up. Literally whoever shows up. Like, they don't have any special credentials. Like, they aren't any smarter than me. Like, they might have been involved longer than me, but sometimes that can be, a hindrance to bringing in new ideas and believing that things can be done differently. So that was the first thing that I had to overcome, was realizing that, like, no, you don't need to be special. And actually, everyone is an expert in their own experience, and that is the best expertise that you can possibly bring to change making work. It's the most powerful. Your personal story, your personal lived experience is the most powerful thing that you can bring to a testimony. Like, if you're going to testify at the state capitol or city council or whatever, like, we are social animals we are primed to respond to each other's stories. And that's what we will remember. That's what moves us to change. And so, like, you don't have to spout a bunch of statistics. You just have to tell your story. And that is something I didn't fully grasp before I started getting involved in this work.
I don't know. That's so Hierophanty. It's like, that's why we want to start this episode with your story, because it's just this perfect illustration of both the Hierophant and how magic can work in your life. You sort of channeled something into this work of art that you probably didn't have like a full picture of in your mind, but you like went into this process of that you were guided through, and then you see yourself in this way. And then once that's kind of set, you like let yourself go there bit by bit, slowly, following the breadcrumbs, telling the stories in the moment, etc. And I wonder what it was like for you to like, what's your relationship to using your voice historically? Like, was it always easy? How have you wrestled with that or come into that?
Yeah, no, I identified so much with a lot of what you were saying about being shy growing up. And I think I was naturally shy and afraid to speak up. And like, I remember my mom tells a story about when I was like maybe 4 years old, and our next door neighbor asked her once about me, is that her real voice? Because it was like this little squeaky tiny little timid voice. And then, like, even thinking back to my advertising career, I remember sitting in brainstorming meetings and being so terrified to like put an idea out there that like I would break out into a full body sweat. I would like start to cry even at the thought of speaking up my idea into the room because I had this belief that if I was having an idea and somebody else hadn't already said it, it's probably because everybody already had that idea and they thought it was so stupid that, of course, they wouldn't say it. So I would just be very nervous to, contribute. But what I realize now is that I have lots of ideas that other people are surprised by. And I wish that I knew the recipe for how I went from being so afraid to speak up or to like be criticized to now I'm just like, I don't know. I just am putting it all out there all the time. And I think a little bit, I think of this quote that I'm totally going to screw up from Lady Bird Johnson. She talked about caring about something so much that you forget to be afraid.
Hmm.
And I think that's where I've gotten like I care so much and I get so excited that I sort of it just kind of spills out of me. I can't keep it in.
I'm just thinking about the feeling in the body that maybe you had for such a long time growing up, and then even in like the earlier part of your career, where there's this like energy of ideas inside you, but this like fear that's just like not letting it move. Versus now, they can just flow and pour like that teapot in your image that you made. It can just like go where it needs to go.
Hmm.
That's beautiful.
Yes. And I also think too, like I grew up in the Baptist church, which is so patriarchal and like, women were not allowed to be preachers. And so I think it was like very explicit to me that I shouldn't use my voice. And I think I internalized that for a long time.
I didn't grow up in a church, but I think it's like when you're if that's the case for you, for one thing, you're just seeing a lot of men do the speaking and the women sit quietly and listen, and also women shushing the children so they're quiet and they're listening. And if you don't see, and while I didn't grow up in a church, it was like for me women would talk to each other. Like I would be, because I hung out with adults a lot because I was an only child, so and they were talking to each other, and since I was kind of a quiet kid, like I didn't gain a lot of attention for myself. So it was just kind of like listening to other adults, other adult women talk to each other. And like when they were alone together, they'd say all kinds of things that they would not say when the men were around. But also like men were able to like talk loud and like say whatever the fuck they wanted. And like, you know, and it
And with
didn't,
authority.
yeah. And there was no, everyone just took it as like, that was fine. Whatever they said, even if the things they said made a lot of people feel uncomfortable internally. And it's pointing me back to like the power of what you're doing, not only with like claiming the body, making democracy sexy, but also like bringing powerful female voice to so all these issues that have been not like shutting women out or just ignoring what women have to say for so long, which is part of the story of how we got to SB 8 and then how we got to the overturning of Roe and so much other bullshit that we're living with now. I'm curious what magic looks like for you in your life. Like now that you're in the witchy rabbit hole, what does it look like for you to be practicing magic, or how do you bring that into your personal life?
Well, I have lots of little practices, but a lot of it connects to I also want to say like pantheon of who I call my chosen ancestors of Texas politics, and really just like chosen ancestors of social change work. So like one of the things that I do is I go to the Texas State Cemetery, especially if like something is going on that I find very troubling, like September 1st is a big day that I always go to the Texas State Cemetery because it's the day that new laws take effect in Texas, and so many of them are often so terrible. But it's also Ann Richards' birthday. And, she was our last Democratic and last woman governor in Texas back in the 90s. And so I'll go visit her grave and I'll thank her for the example that she set and everything that she did to make Texas a place that is, some somewhere where everyone can thrive. And then I ask her, like, what should I do next? And I'll pull a tarot card. And one of the times that I went and did that, I asked, like, well, what should I do? Thank you, Anne. What should I do next? There was this enormous, like, huge butterfly, this big blue butterfly, and it just was like flying circles around me and kind of like followed me as I walked out. And I was like, and I know that, like, I looked up afterwards that winged creatures are people from the other side, like visiting us. And I was like, oh my God, that was Anne. She was like thanking me for honoring her and like giving me encouragement to keep going. I cry every time I think about it. And so, like, I feel that these chosen ancestors are with me. They're giving me guidance. They're giving me encouragement. So that's one piece of it. And also, like, I get very tangible lessons from reading about the work that they did when they were here. And actually, I have a little piece coming out in Austin Woman magazine in April where it's like 5 pieces of wisdom from my chosen ancestors and the things that I've learned from them. So that's one big thing that guides me in my magical journey.
I think that's another aspect of the Hierophant that's really important is this kind of like, we've talked about like the messenger, like one aspect of what you're doing is channeling your passion and your experience of being in this place of feeling kind of paralyzed, not that's a strong word, but like feeling like you weren't doing enough to changing that, but not only changing it for yourself, like trying to bring others along with you. So there's that kind of like messaging around your passion. And then there's the messaging of just like translation, which is all of this really convoluted, overly complicated, bureaucratic stuff in the system of democracy, quote, that makes it very difficult for people to understand what's going on or how like the mechanisms of change or policy actually work. Like your messaging around like, let me break this down for you. Let me kind of show you what's out there so you don't have to go do research and you don't have to spend a lot of time that you don't have trying to like fight this development in your neighborhood or whatever the case may be. And then there's the element of the Hierophant of like preserving documentation and kind of being a historical, having like a historical record keeping sort of function. And so two things about what you said with the ancestors is first that like ancestral work doesn't have to be directly with your own ancestors. Like it sure can be, but we can also choose these figures and people who carved a path for us that we're trying to walk now that has nothing to do with who we're related to. And we can look to them for guidance and we can connect with them spiritually and we can learn from their lives, even though they're not here now. And so you're doing like, there's a great, beautiful lesson in all of that. And it works. Like the butterfly is just perfect proof. And then there's like you're still really staying connected and looking to the history of the choices women made and the challenges that they faced and how they navigated through sometimes even harsher conditions to get change in place. And now you're like, because it's coming through you and you're familiar with it and you're putting it into your own action with your own sensibility, there's kind of like a living history element to your work. But Yeah, I just think that's another function of the Hierophant, that you're looking to the people who came before you and you're looking to the record and you're talking about some of that, but you're also just living it. And I just think I just want to highlight that. Like that's Hierophant work also. You're hitting all of the buttons or all of the facets of this. It's really incredible.
This is so cool because I actually like I haven't worked with the Hierophant very much, or like I haven't been, that's one of the cards that I have been less familiar with. So I'm learning so much and I'm like, what? This is crazy. This does resonate. So thanks for teaching me.
Yeah, sure. I had a reading with Sister Temperance, who I believe will be on an upcoming episode. But she had this like, she was offering a deal for Capricorns because she's Capricorn. And so I had a reading at the beginning of the year. And the Hierophant was at the middle of my reading. Like she does this kind of formation of cards, and the Hierophant was in the middle. And this is just for everybody listening, but like so that's just like a month or two before I launched this podcast where I'm using my voice a lot. And also like a couple months before I'm like putting out this book of journaling prompts for all the cards in the tarot, which is like a synthesis of my understanding of the cards and like my work as a creativity coach and stuff like that. So I'm just offering listeners like who may be pulling the Hierophant or seeing the Hierophant, because it's a very like obscure, no one uses the word Hierophant. Like you will not hear it in conversation, you will not see it in a book unless you are working with tarot. um and so, and then also, and maybe now is a good time, Becky, for us to look at the card together. Yeah, it shows, and we're looking at the modern witch version. So it looks, this deck takes very close, it adheres very closely to the Smith Rider Waite. And in that one, we'll see a man standing in the place of the Hierophant and two men down below. But here, tell me what you see. Can you see that?
Well, yes, it's so interesting. Like she is sitting on this throne, but like her dress is tattered and it's like she's been through some shit. But she's
Yeah.
got this beautiful crown and this scepter with a jewel on the end of it. She's got tattoos. Like she looks pretty badass.
Yeah. She's got she's wearing a red dress, like you were wearing a red coat, and this white shawl around her neck that flows down to her feet and over one of the arms. And so she's facing straight toward us. She looks kind of serious, like she's taking this very seriously. And then there's two pillars on either side. And then there's two people standing in front of her. So like there's an audience built into the card, like with the magician or the high priestess or the empress or the emperor. Like you just see that figure. They're the only
Mm.
human. But then when you get to the Hierophant, this is the first time we bring other people into the mix. And there are two humans, but we only see them from like the shoulder blades up, and they're facing away from the viewer and they're facing the Hierophant. So there's like listeners and receivers.
Hmm.
And then I want to draw attention to the keys that are in a like X at the feet of the Hierophant.
Yeah, I was noticing that too.
What do you think about those?
It's interesting. They're crossed. I'm like, is this like X marks the spot or
Yeah, and like so in a kind of more ancient sense, or maybe a more like medieval sense or something, the Hierophant I think would function as like the Hierophant can get a bad rap because of like maybe the same kind of experiences you had in church, where it's like, back in the day, it was like people didn't get to read the Bible. You had to go to church and someone would talk to you, like the authority figure would be up there interpreting God for you and presenting God's message to you. And there was this sense that like not everyone has access to God or the divine, just these chosen people, and you go see them and they'll tell you what God has to say to you, but you don't get to like read the word of God. You don't get to know God personally. And so the kind of shadow or like the part of the Hierophant that I think we want to leave behind is that sense of separation and the part of, or like authority or a gatekeeping kind of quality, which we see in between the two pillars, this person who's like exalted or put in this place of power or elevation. And then the other two people in the card are like, they don't even come up to the Hierophant's knees. They're like lower down, looking up to receive this. So that's part of, I think, the history of this card or part of the implied history of this card. But as we update that and bring it into modern life, I like to think of it as like, let me, like, I've done the research or like, I've really committed myself to this. And now you're here because you're interested too. So let me share with you what I know, not because I'm the expert or because I'm the authority, but because I just have the information to share. So sometimes this card can be like a teacher, needing a teacher or wanting a teacher or becoming a teacher, or like even getting a therapist who can like help like message with you around parts of your life that you need to look at or whatever. And so the keys, I feel like the Hierophant is not so much like the gatekeeper, but like one who can unlock
Mm,
like understanding, I guess. But I wonder if the keys mean anything different to you.
that's so cool. I don't know. I a little bit I see it as like they're there in front of her, like you can go up and grab one. And there's multiple, right? So it's like here are the keys. Like I'm not hanging on to them. I'm offering them to you to go unlock whatever it is that you need to unlock.
I really like that. I love that. And they're sitting right in front of this Hierophant's bare feet. There's something very humbling, I think, about the bare feet. It's also like I walked the road barefoot to come here so I could like share something with you. Oh, I'm glad you said that. I love that. So let's talk about the look part. Let's talk about boobs.
I
And
love it. My favorite topic.
I checked with Becky in advance to see if it was okay with her to talk about boobs. But like boobs make a lovely and sometimes prominent, I don't know if prominence is the right word, but like noticeable, let's say, aspect. And you've already disclosed that that was like kind of the point. But
Totally.
yeah, I'll stop there. I know that's not even a question. What a cop out of me. But what do you want to say about boobs?
I love boobs so much. I really do. Um, and, and specifically, I love mine.
They're great.
I enjoy my own boobs, and that makes me really happy because, you know, women in this culture are truly groomed to dislike everything about ourselves.
Word.
And so to have even one thing about myself that I'm like, this is perfect and I wouldn't change a thing is so empowering and great. And I everyone should see my boobs.
And now they can. I mean,
They can.
not always, not fully. What has that been a difference for you, like to, not only step into activism and step into using your voice powerfully, but to like embody yourself and like show off your body in these ways? Because part of Democrasexy too is like you have slamming costumes. Like sometimes it's jumpsuits, sometimes it's sequined, like leotards. There's fringe, like it's got the Texasy element. It's sassy. I feel like Dolly Parton, Ann Richards. I don't know about Lady Bird Johnson, but definitely Ann Richards would all like love it. Is that a difference for you stepping into that?
I think it's part of the like what feels good for me, right? And as I mentioned, I'm a Libra, like I have to adorn myself in all the shiny things. And it did take a certain amount of courage to do that. Like I wear this one jumpsuit that Fort Lonesome here in Austin custom made for me. It has this, it's chain stitched. There's this like kind of right in my lady bits area is this kind of angry kitty, and they were very much like Pussy Grabs Back kind of inspired. And it's just so silly and wonderful and gorgeous and like this long, long fringe. And I was like, this feels so silly to spend all this money on this like costume for my what is supposed to be my job. Like jobs are supposed to be serious, right? But a- again, it's like when you're tapped into mystical stuff, you do things that don't make sense to anyone else but yourself. And it made, I was like, I know that I have to get this wild jumpsuit. Like I know that it's important for me. And it actually has been some of the best marketing for myself that I could have possibly invested in. Like a couple elections ago, I was at the UT campus polling location and handing out ballot guides. And this girl walked up to me and I was wearing the jumpsuit and she was like, I don't know who you are or what you're doing, but like, I want in. And it's like when you put out your weird vibe, people who are into that weird vibe will come find you and it's worth it.
Yeah, that's another great story. It's like she didn't need to know. She was like just looking at you there in that moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love this idea of like an outfit as marketing because I think, for anyone who's trying to market anything or like, put creative work out in the world, there's so much formulaic crap. I mean, maybe it's not all crap, but there's like for a lot of formulaic advice and lots of sort of like what's proper. But like every brand has like your brand can have a very rebellious personality or a very offbeat personality. And so yeah, it isn't just like what you put in an Instagram post or like what's in your email newsletter, but like how you're out vibrating in the world and like being noticed and kind of transmitting your energy and your like you had a whole jumpsuit that was just like a walking billboard for let's have fun changing everything.
My friend gave me this really great compliment once that she really she was in awe of how truly free I seemed out in the world. And I was like, "Oh, that's such a what a cool thing for somebody to think about me." And like it's true when I am like, aligned with my intuition and aligned with what brings me joy and aligned with what I feel is my purpose. I'm just like it's that whole forgetting to be afraid thing. I'm just like I'm here. I'm gonna do all the things. And it is freedom.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example. Like, we obviously need to be out there fighting for freedom for ourselves and for other people in all kinds of different ways. Like, no one's handing it out, like, no one's just giving away new rights, right? Um, but to kind of practice freedom or liberation, we can best do it inside first to like free ourselves from all the shit the system's put on us and like claim who we are and go out in the world and be that.
And it gives other people permission to do the same thing. They see you doing it and they're like, wait, she's she's shed all these like boxes and expectations and she's doing whatever the weird fuck she wants.
And she looks like she's having a great time.
I am.
Yeah. Has Democrasexy helped you liberate yourself? Like, has nurturing it kind of forced you to find new places of liberation?
Yeah, yeah, yes. And it's wild. So the very first chosen ancestor that I connected with, like at the beginning of before democracy was even like a thought in my brain, was Anais Nin the writer who like had this scandalous, outrageous personal life, and she became famous for her diary where she wrote about like being free, like just she was it's like the 1920s and 30s, and she was just like not at all adhering to any sort of societal expectations. And so like that her spirit like really infused a lot of my like the beginnings of Democrasexy. And so like she's been the first one who's been with me all along. And I think back to all the ways that we are out in the streets trying to dismantle systems, but we can't be successful dismantling systems out there unless we have dismantled the systems within us. And so I think of a time when I have two little girls, and there was this time when I was telling them that we had to clean their room. You have to clean your room or else daddy will be mad. And I like caught myself in that, and I was like, what a fucked up like patriarchal thought for me to plant in these little girls' head. Like the reason they have to clean their room is so they don't make daddy mad. Like that is so wrong. And so I corrected myself and was like, no, we have to clean our room because we need to have a neat space and we find where our things are, and because it's like our responsibility as humans. But if we don't identify those ways that we have like integrated patriarchy, capitalism, like all the systems that are harmful, like into ourselves, then we're not going to be successful, trying to change systems on the outside.
Speaking of doing the inner work to extract all the toxic beliefs from all the toxic systems that were implanted in us, that's the work we try to do here at Typewriter Tarot. And we try to make it fun, curious, and full of love and surrounded by community, because the magic really starts inside us. It has to start at home. So at Typewriter Tarot, this is a place where you can explore some of that. You might want to, if you're enjoying these conversations, join our email list, which you can do over at typewritertarot.com. You might enjoy our free gatherings, Creative Coven, which happen 8 times a year, where we nourish and nurture our creativity through the lens of divination, nature, and things that are anti all the toxic systems. You might also enjoy getting a tarot reading from yours truly. I also offer one-on-one coaching for creative spirits or people who are running creative enterprises or people who are seeking to find a more true and personalized version of spirituality. So there's a lot for you here in the garden of Typewriter Tarot. The doors are open and you are welcome. Come check it out, explore what's available. I'd love to hear from you and know more about you and your creative spirit existence out in the world. So also feel free to get in touch and say hello. I'm curious, is Democrasexy sustainable for, like, is it sustaining you? Is it what you can do full time now?
No, no. Uh, and actually, but I'm so committed to it anyway. And I believe that eventually it will sustain me. So, because I know that Democrasexy, and it may not always take that shape, but like this work is my vocation. This is my calling in the world. Like, I'm committed to making this my life. And so I actually was faced with the decision to either stay in my marriage or keep doing Democrasexy. And so I left my marriage,
Wow.
and I had to get a W-2 job. So I have a full-time job, and I also am still doing Democrasexy on the side. But the interesting thing is since like making that hard decision and making that leap to like be committed to my calling, now like grant opportunities are coming my way, like more so than before. So it's almost like because it's like a little bit Democrasexy was testing me, like, do you choose me? And if so, like I choose you. And so I see that happening. Like I see in my future a path where like I will just get to do the work that I know I was put here to do. But it's okay to be in this transition time. Like my W-2 job is also great and a really good fit for me. And it's like all part of the path. But yeah, it was a leap.
Yeah, there's another example of having to like shed a self and step in a particular direction. And wow, what a tough choice. And or I mean, not a tough choice, maybe in a sense, but like a tough choice to be put in front of you, let's say. And I think it's really powerful that like you choose this work. It just shows, yeah, like I mean, you can see anyone who's like in the presence of Democrasexy, whether it's like on Instagram or at an event, can feel the inherent passion and connection. Like you also give like King of Wands vibes or Queen of Wands vibes in that way. And I asked that question not because I think that's any kind of like benchmark of whether something is successful or not, but more so for kind of an audience of people who are probably out there trying to pursue their own strange niche, like things they made up that they feel really passionate about. And it's hard to like take what you love and go make it support your life in any quick kind of way. Um, and I'm glad you're getting more of these grant opportunities. And I'm sure that has so much to do with just like the great work you're doing and how noticeable it is and people spreading the word about it. But like, how do you want people to support your work?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. So an interesting, it's all very interesting how this conversation with you has come about and how you've talked about like, being a channel and all that kind of thing. I work with a coach. Her name's Amanda Gold, and she's incredible. And I just had a conversation with her yesterday about how like I feel like I'm a channel, but I feel like I'm not like I'm getting stopped up, like I'm not putting out all of the messages that I'm getting. And so I'm getting ready to pick back up a couple of projects that I kind of put down while I was going through that very difficult personal transition. I have a Substack newsletter, Democrasexy, and also I started doing a little podcast there as well, also called Democrasexy, but I tried to take the pressure off myself from having it be highly produced. So I call it voice memos from a pleasure activist. So it's just meant to be like, you're my friend and I'm sending you a voice memo about what's on my mind. And everything that I plan to put there is much more this like emotional support type uh information and nurturance that I'm being called to give. So that's getting ready to fire back up. You can find those things on my website, democrasexy.com. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok, Democrasexy. And so those are like the main ways to to support my work at the moment.
And people can just donate, right?
Sure. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can just Venmo Democrasexy if you like the work that I'm doing. You can become a paid subscriber on my Substack. You can also, if you are in need of the sort of like translation type work that I can do for like how political systems work or policy or advocacy or any of that, like you can hire me to do that, uh, or freelance writing, all the things.
Nice. And you have merch, do you not?
I do, yeah. I have really cute Texorcism t-shirts and I came up with a shirt design. After Barbie came out, I came up with a shirt design. A woman's place is in the Mojo Dojo Casa House of Representatives. So that's one of my favorites too.
Yes, you can support Becky by wearing that shirt and
And you can
Democrasexy.
also hire me to speak. Like if you
Mm.
want an inspiring message delivered in a sparkly, fringy package, I'm available for speaking. And I've done a lot of like emceeing fundraisers, events, that kind of thing too.
Nice. I hope you charge extra for the jumpsuit.
I should, shouldn't I?
What advice would you give people who are, I know you said it's kind of hard to tell how you came to kind of finally feel comfortable using your voice, but is there any advice you would give to someone who is pulling the Hierophant a lot, who is somehow being like called into
Mm.
messaging of some kind?
The best things that I've done for myself in terms of coming into my voice are to just trust whatever it is that I'm feeling called to, even if it is weird and doesn't make any sense, practical sense, or if it feels important to me, I have found that it's important to somebody else. And if it's helpful to me, it's helpful to somebody else. And just trust that.
That's great advice. And I think that's part of kind of, you mentioned this earlier, like your intuition kind of being like, this jumpsuit is for you and you should get it. And that would not maybe be the conventional wisdom or what everyone would suggest for you to do in that moment. But you turned out to be right. And like you trusting, I think as we go through living a witchy life or living a creative and magical life, that developing that trust and strengthening it over time is like critical to just staying on whatever path may be ahead of us. And it's really scary because like our intuition is not going to give us the same suggestions that the culture will give us. And that's often how you know maybe you're on your own right path, is that it is different, and that there are people, or that in your imagination there are people who will not understand, or yeah, they just won't get it, but it's not for them. It's for you. And the other people, the other weirdos who will see your jumpsuit and immediately recognize how fucking amazing you are.
100%. The phrase that I've been coming back to a lot in the last couple weeks that I found really comforting whenever I'm like, I feel uncomfortable in the culture, I feel uncomfortable in the expectations of me. Like even something as silly as like at my W-2 job, I have to fill out timesheets and it like sends me into existential crisis. I hate it so much. Like I can't, I'm just like, why is this so hard for me? And the thing that I've been telling myself is, I'm from the future. Like, I'm from a future where we don't have to do timesheets, where like we're all equal and thriving. Like, of course, it's uncomfortable for me here. Of course, these expectations are uncomfortable for me because I'm from the future. And I think, like, if you think that it helps you be more confident in whatever like weird decisions you're being called to because you're from the future. Of course, it doesn't make sense to anybody else because they're not from the future. But for the other people who are from the future too, they'll be like, yeah, we're
That's
all from the
perfect.
future.
I love that. That's yeah, like a mental trick. I'm going to start using that. What about this election? What do you want us to know? What do you want us to do? It's
Mm.
so like heavy already. Here in
100%.
end of March, looking ahead to November
Yes.
2024.
There's something that Adrienne Marie Brown says that I find a lot of comfort in. She says, the future is unknown and it's up to us to shape it. And so even when I think I know what's going to happen, I remind myself, actually, I don't. I don't know. Like going back to what we were saying at the beginning, right? Like this crazy, terrible global pandemic happened, and that was so unimaginable, which So I just keep reminding myself that unimaginable good things can happen too. And I also think back to like the version of me who was so disappointed in myself after the 2016 election, where I was so disappointed in myself that I hadn't given it my all. And like I vowed never to have that feeling again. And so I'm not gonna have that feeling again. So there's some comfort in that, that like whatever I have to offer, like I'm gonna do that. And I know now for this election, what I have to offer is comfort and emotional sustenance to the people who are like so scared, you know? So like that's really what I'm focused on. So I think we all have our version of that. Like we all have our version of the right fit to plug in and make change. And it's just a matter of like kind of doing a little bit of experimenting, kind of really developing relationships. That's one of the things that one of the pieces of this emotional support. I started this with a mental health care provider, tech support, TEX support, and we get together and kind of like just acknowledge the ways that the political realities are weighing heavy on us. And there's something so powerful about being in community with other people who are being very vulnerable about talking about the ways that systems impact us. And we always walk away from those meetings feeling empowered and less alone, even though we've been talking about all the things that make us sad. I feel like that was a rambly answer, but
No, that was a great answer. And I think that's a reminder to us all, like, what do we want to do now so that when November or could be decided, like it took a while last time to know what was going on. But at that point, we have a sense of having shown up and kind of moved in accordance with our integrity. And we didn't sit and hope that everyone else, worry about what else everyone else was doing and if they would choose the right thing. But what did we do? It feels important that your work is kind of shifting toward not just the informational, navigational stuff, but like you're hitting on the fact that these systems are traumatizing almost wherever we are in or whatever identity we carry, they just are traumatizing. Like I think even to privileged people. And it makes it really hard to like move forward or to feel safe to fight. And the fact that your work is moving toward like noticing those emotional and psychological barriers and helping people work with that, it's almost like coaching kind of work that you're offering in mass. So, if that's you, if you're out there like, I want to do more, but I'm scared, or I hate calling reps, or I don't know how to go find my like delegation, or should I show, like, please go check out Becky's work and get on her Substack and get her voice memos so that in the months leading up to this election and for all the elections after that, assuming we still have them, um, you feel like you're contributing at your pace and in a way that feels like magical and aligned for you.
yes. I also love like people DM me their questions all the time, and I love that too. Like I love answering people's very specific questions about the political system.
It doesn't overwhelm you?
Well, I don't have that like I'm not that big, Cecily.
Yet. I'm curious how you're grappling with Joe Biden and Gaza, and also being a Texas voter. Sometimes I'm like, my vote's not gonna, presidentially speaking.
This has been a hard talking about like feeling strong in your voice. It took me a long time to get to a place of feeling like I could have the courage to speak my mind about like my disappointment is a light word. My disappointment
Yeah.
in Joe Biden for continuing to send our tax dollars to pay for bombs that are killing children and innocent people. And like the horror is untold. And but at the end of the day, like I want to feel confident that I have stood in my values. And I want to know that like again, I don't want to look back and be disappointed in myself that I didn't stand in my values. So it has cost me, like, there are close friends that we're not really that close anymore because their values and mine are different on this, or we don't see eye to eye. But like I wouldn't change. When I look back, I'm like, I stood in my values, both in terms of like what I was saying and also in terms of like how I interacted with people who disagreed with me.
Mm.
Like I'm always going to interact, no matter how strongly you disagree with me, I'm going to interact with you with love because that's the world, that's the future that I'm from.
Yeah.
We treat each other with love even when we disagree, right? So like, yeah.
Yeah. Is standing in your values in this instance, you're, yeah, vocalizing the extreme disappointment. I mean, I think those of us who are like watching what's going on and hate as much as you do that our tax dollars are funding this horrific ongoing genocide. Like, yeah, it's just like such a feeling. And then it's like, well, I know if Trump is going to be president, that will drill everywhere. The environment will be screwed up. The entire government will be corrupt. We might start other wars, or we definitely will do even less, I think, for the people of Gaza.
100%.
Is it like, yeah, I guess like what is standing in your values in these moments? Because I think a lot of people are faced with that very difficult choice of like, what do I say? I know how I feel. What do I say? Because it's now so fraught and so risky, it seems like,
Yeah.
to speak.
And that's true. And a lot of people have lost a lot by standing in their values and speaking up. I think for me, whatever I would lose is not worth the disappointment in myself that I would feel for not using the levers of power that are available to me. So I have a platform. It's not enormous, but like people listen to me and they trust me. And I know I couldn't, in good conscience, be like, Joe Biden's the greatest and he's never made a mistake. Like, that's not authentic to me. And it's also like for the people who see things the way that I do, like, people don't want to be told, like, people rightfully become furious these days when you're like, vote blue no matter who. Like,
Mm.
I will do that in November because I think the alternative is like will be devastating. But in the primary, where I had an opportunity to do something different, and it has worked, I think, to some extent, like all of these states where like a big percentage of people in the primary voted like uncommitted. So now the US finally didn't veto a resolution in support of ceasefire at the UN. Like that's because of people using their voice in the areas where, they have the opportunity to do so.
One little thing I was doing is like when Joe Biden and his campaign text me for money and they say, I'm humbly asking for you to blah, blah, blah. I respond with like, I'm humbly asking you to call for a ceasefire immediately. And, I have no idea. Like, I don't imagine that those texts get read. I don't know if they do or not. But it's just like, I'm not, okay, if you want to bot me up for money, I'm going to human you back. And,
I do the same thing, actually.
okay, good. Yeah, and I think too, just like the reality of where we are and the political system we have is that it's not that humane. Even the Democrats have been missing a lot of opportunities to create the future that you are from. And yeah, it's hard choices. And I did the same in the primary where I chose a different candidate than Joe Biden, only and specifically because of what's going on around that to try and send that
Yeah.
message. And yeah, I'm still not seeing Joe Biden do any of the like real things I would like to see him do, but it's different than it was a few months ago. It's not enough by any means, but that ceasefire resolution is important, even if it's like not changing everything right this second.
And the other thing that I've come to realize too, so like one of the other levers of power that was available to me on this topic is I sit on the City of Austin's Commission for Women. Several times that city council like pass a resolution in support of ceasefire. So because I am a commissioner, I had the opportunity to bring a resolution in support of ceasefire to the Women's Commission. And so I did that. And it passed, not unanimously, but I know that that's not going to, like me on the Women's Commission in the city of Austin is not going to materially fix the suffering of the people in Gaza. But what I had not thought of ahead of time was I encouraged people from the public to come for the open comment period at the beginning of the commission meeting to express their reasons for wanting us to pass the resolution. And so several people came and told heartbreaking stories, and it was very emotional. And then everybody who came for public comment sort of left while we finished the rest of the meeting and the rest of our business. I was shocked when I walked out of City Hall and everybody who had come to testify was out there waiting for me to hug me and to thank me for bringing this resolution, which I was like shocked and like kind of embarrassed because I felt like it felt like such a small thing to be able to offer compared to like the enormity of the issue. But so it didn't fix anything for the people in Gaza, but it fixed or like offered some comfort, some like belief that somebody was listening and seeing them and their suffering to the people in Austin. So even if we're not fixing the global issue, we are offering some sort of healing to the people directly around us. And that was worth it enough for me.
Mm, yeah, I'm getting chills everywhere. And I think that's a beautiful example. I feel like that's an example of like laying the keys at your feet is this invitation for other people to come and speak in some kind of public forum where a decision is being made, and it's not the decision that can, end the suffering, but there are people all over the world having difficult, painful feelings about this because of their different layers of proximity or their relationship to Gaza, or people who don't have a relationship to it, but who see this and as a human being who wants to like live in a world that runs on love, they don't want that. And so like offering these spaces and inviting people to come share that, and then having this feeling listened to, and I just love that. I think that's an example of like we can sit in the helplessness or the hopelessness of the fact that we can't materially take an action that will end it right now. And we can stay there, or we can find creative ways to make symbolic movements or to be messengers, and be messaging around like what we care about and what we stand for and the love we want to see and more pleasure in our lives, not more suffering. So thank you for the work you do, Becky. And thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about your creative and magical life and the Hierophant.
Oh my gosh, this has been like my favorite conversation of recent memory, and I'm so honored that you brought me on and asked me to talk about all my most favorite things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Becky for coming on the show. Thank you for listening. I hope this conversation brought you something inspiring, empowering, encouraging around how you want to show up as the Hierophant and the messages that you would like to transmit out into the world. I hope you'll follow Becky over at Democrasexy and check out her Substack. You can find links for all of that in the show notes. And I also want to give an acknowledgement. Becky brought up pleasure activism, which is a term I became familiar with through Adrienne Marie Brown, and I suspect Becky did as well. And there should have been a big uh, celebration and shout out to the goddess Adrian for pleasure activism. She wrote a whole book about it, filled with essays from many other contributors thinking about and sharing about that term and what it can look like in the world. So if pleasure activism feels pleasurable to you, go check out that book by Adrienne Marie Brown. I'll include a link in the show notes as well. Also, special thanks to Chantal Defelice, who created the music for the podcast and who edited this episode. And another shout out to Ami Plas, who created the artwork for our logo. Thank you so much for listening once again, and I'll see you next time. I'll talk to you next time, rather. Until then, enjoy your creative and magical life.